Good evening, members, officers, and members of the public, whether you're here in person or watching us live on YouTube. I'm Councillor Whaley Ho, the Chair of the Audit and Member Standards Committee, and I would like to welcome you to our meeting this evening. Because this is our first meeting of the term, and before we crack on with the agenda, I invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with my vice chair on the right.
Yes, hello, I'm Phil Whitehouse. I'm councillor for Sconnell and Little Aston Ward.
Good evening, I'm Paul Taylor, councillor for Boney and Central.
Good evening, my name's Sharon Taylor, councillor for Boney and Central.
Good evening, I'm John Smith, councillor for St John's.
Good evening, I'm from Grant Thornton and external auditors of Litchfield Council.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Barton, I'm the Assistant Director for Customer Services. Hi, I'm Rob Reynolds, I'm the Compliance and Data Protection Officer.
I'm Thomas, Assistant Director of Finance and Commissioning in Council Section 151 Officer.
Good evening, Andrew Wood. I'm the Audit Manager for the Shared Service with Litchfield District Council.
Good evening, I am Will Stevenson. I'm a Governance Officer and I am the Clerk of the Committee.
Thank you very much, everyone. And with that, we will now start off with the agenda. And number one is apologies for absence.
Chair, we received apologies from Councillor Keith Vernon.
Thank you. And I also understand that Dave Robertson is due to attend. He's just late stuck in traffic. Item number two, declarations of interest.
Chair, we haven't received any declarations of interest in advance of the meeting.
Thank you. And no other members are currently indicating either. So we'll move on to item number three, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Now, from the last committee meeting, there's only two members from that meeting who are now members of this current committee meeting, myself and Councillor Robertson, who's currently running a little bit late. So what I propose to do is perhaps hold on that until he arrives, and then we can slot that in somewhere else into the agenda if members are happy with that.
Okay. Yep.
Fantastic. So we'll now move on to item number 4, which is the annual Treasury Management Report.
Thanks, Chair. So this is the report that comes before the committee to provide information on Treasury Management performance for the financial year 22-23. It covers capital expenditure, capital receipts, funding of the capital programme compared to the budget. In addition, it provides information on the capital finance requirement or the borrowing need, and the minimum revenue provision or the amount we set aside to repay any debt. And it also provides a little bit of information on cash flow forecasts and cash flow actuals. We do include an actual balance sheet subject to audit and compared to our balance sheet projections, and we try and explain the most significant variances. And if you look back on previous reports, you'll probably see the most significant variance that always appears as the pension fund liability, or as it is in 22-23, it becomes an asset, interestingly. We do provide information on service treasury management investments based around security, liquidity, and yield. And we do provide comparisons for members of how the security is to Ireland Coast clients, both district councils and their wider portfolio base. Couple of other comments just to make then. So the report demonstrates that we're compliant with all prudential indicators that were approved by council in February, and all treasury limits that were part of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement approved by council in February. And once the committees review the prudential indicators, they will be presented to council later in the year for them to formally approve the redemption code. And that's the second question.
Thanks, Anthony. Any questions for Anthony regarding this item? Yeah, Councillor Whitehouse.
Hello, Anthony. The statement that the pension was a liability and now an asset, that had some surprise in your voice as well. How did that actually happen? And could we be in a situation again where it reverses to where it was before?
That is a really good question, because Council House is the only member of the committee of the group. So that I think if you've been on for a while, you'll see this valuation swings, and it swings significantly. I think for the last 2-3 years, the school's been an obligation, but it's gone up and down. And I'm trying to think, I think it might be the first time it's been an asset in my recollection recently. And the reason it has swung so significantly is as a result of the changes in interest rates in the environment. So, the way the pension actually makes the calculation is that they run through their modelling what the obligation is, the council's obligation to pay future years' pensions. They work that out with complex formulas around mortality, pension increase rates, inflation, etc. And they run through thousands of scenarios to get what the valuation is. They then discount that figure that they get based on what they call the discount rate. And what they use as the discount rate is the rate of bonds, effectively called the bonds. So if I look at last year, the rate that was used was 2.7%, and that's increased to 4.75% for 22-23. So the higher the rate, the more it discounts the sum that's outstanding. So we went from an obligation of 98 million last year, sorry, from 150 million the previous year to 98 million. That's where you can see the swing from an obligation or liability to an asset. Small changes in the assumptions have significant impacts upon the numbers that go in the account. Hopefully that explains it all.
Yes, thank you. I think the second part of the question was aimed, do we need to be doing anything whilst we're in an asset situation to protect that, rather than maybe get back to the state we were before?
I would argue there isn't a lot we can do with this. These are market-based factors that impact this, and they're in the wider economic environment, so interest rates, levels of mortality in the population sector. And really, the only thing that we can influence to a large extent here is the level of the contribution we make into the pension fund. And we get set our rates on a 3-year basis by the pension fund and the actuary. And we normally go with either the actuary set rates, or we'll go with a slightly lower discounted rate, but they're not hugely materially different. That in reality is all we can really do to protect the council's financial position. The wider economics that impact on this, impact on
has that answered your questions, Councillor?
Yes, on that subject.
Is there any other questions or comments from members? Avatar.
Just to add on to Anthony's comments, this is the situation across all local government bodies at the moment, given there's the interest rates where often most councils now show a pension asset compared to a liability. The only thing from an accounting perspective is how much of that asset you actually recognise in the financial statement. So it's to do in terms of the reporting of how much of it is how much you want to take into that is a real obligation of an asset. And so there is a special accounting consideration you need to pay. So it's not like 100% sometimes the asset will go into the book. There might be a proportion of that.
Thank you, Abdul. So, if there's no further comments, the recommendations are to review the report and issues raised within, which I think we would have done, and we've asked questions regarding so. And also 2.2 to review the actual 2022-23 prudential indicators contained within the report. Are we all happy that we've done so? Okay, so that item is now done. Item 5 of the agenda is the SIPA Resilience Index, and that's Anthony again.
Yes, so we bring this report annually to the committee, and this is the fourth release that we've done on the Resilience Index. It shows the council's performance against a range of measures associated with financial risk, and it compares against both our nearest statistical neighbours and the wider district council group of comparators. The majority of the indicators that we show are lower or medium risk, and that's relative to the comparator groups, and they're also in the main stable over the period. So the only area where the measure has increased in risk from lower to medium is in the change in reserves, and it's quite difficult to explain in detail what that might be, but it's broadly it's likely to be because our reserves have not grown as fast as other comparator authorities, or it could be that we reduced ours quicker than other comparator authorities. It's slightly distorted in 21-22 because it's unwinding COVID grants and things like that are in the reserves, and some councils will use those quicker than others. As the council section 151 obviously, this measure doesn't overly concern me because both the reserve sustainability and the level of reserve measures are lower to medium and stable. I also wanted to highlight that in the last week or so, members might be aware the government set up something snappily called OFLOG, which is the Office of Local Government, and it's produced its initial set of metrics to assess financial risk, and two of these are specifically around reserve levels. So non-ring-fence reserves or general reserves as a percentage of expenditure, non-ring-fence reserves as a percentage of total service expenditure, and then there are a series of other ones around total core spending power for dwelling, level of council tax banding, council tax revenue for dwelling, debt servicing as a percentage of core spending power, total debt as a percentage of core spending power. Now, what I'm intending to do is to include those in future reports to the committee, and I'll also include them in the various NTFS reports that to Cabinet and Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But what those metrics show is that I think apart from one situation, we're very near to the median, and we're within the range of the majority of council, which is either side of the median. I think the only one where we're slightly outside is the level of debt, and that's level of debt on the low side, so it's a positive rather than on the high side, which would be a negative. So I'm happy to take any other questions from members.
Thank you, Anthony. Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Whitehouse.
Yes, Anthony. Sorry if I keep asking questions that perhaps you've gone through before. But as far as reserves are concerned, does that affect in any way the figure that we get from the government as far as the income that we receive from them? If we've got high reserves, would they look at that and think, actually, this council doesn't need any extra money from us this year?
Not at present. And the way the government determines the amount of money we get, in part is based around need. So the size of our population, and then it adds some measures around deprivation, sparseness, etc. And it also takes off from that level of need their notional level of council tax. So the difference between the two is the level of support they're doing. So at the moment, reserves don't form part of that equation or calculation. Now, the government has made noises previously around the level of reserves council as a whole ring. I think part of the reason behind setting up OFLOG and the provision of those metrics is to provide more information to members of the public around the level of those reserves and how they compare to similar authorities within the broad spectrum. And it's quite difficult to take account of the level of reserves in the calculation for several reasons, not least because COVID significantly impacts on the level of those reserves. In some ways, in a positive way, because they have a lot of grants, which they then allow us to spend over a period of time. But in a number of authorities, it's depleted the reserves quite significantly. And you hold reserves for a variety of reasons. And you probably find, although there are nearest neighbour councils where there are similar aspects to the council characteristics, no two councils are the same. And so, just as a simple example, up until this financial year, the council didn't operate leisure centres. So you can make an argument in that our financial is low in this situation, so our reserves would be potentially lower. We've taken on responsibility for leisure centres now. We've got responsibility for £2.5 million of income. You could make an argument the level of reserves to increase to take account of that. So I don't quite see how the government would take that into account in any type of calculation that bears in mind the specifics of each local authority.
Thank you.
Councillor,
Thank you, Chair. The change in the reserves is obviously the only marker that's fluctuated this year, but the level of reserves has stopped at medium risk for 2 years in a row now. Are we trending back down to lower, or how's that looking sort of in for the next few years?
So that's a difficult question. In fact, I can say that obviously the council's made a decision to use some of its reserves and place shaping. So from our perspective, you will see likely the reduction in our reserve levels. Where I say it's difficult is because the metrics that we provide are relative. So it depends then what other councils do in terms of where we sit in the risk spectrum. So I would expect it to be medium. It could even, to be fair, go to higher if the level of our depletion is much higher than other comparators. What I would say is that isn't necessarily a reason to be concerned, because we've made a decision to use reserves for place shaping rather than using it to balance the budget. I think we're a bit more concerned if we were continually using reserves to balance the budget. That's where the risk is sitting. And if you look at, there's a number of authorities been announced in the last week or so, Southampton, Hastings, etc. A lot of the risk in those authorities is around the fact they're using reserves to continue balance budgets because they're not achieving savings targets, and that is more of that where I would have an issue in terms of the risk perspective.
would you like any supplementary questions to that, Councillor? Okay. Any other councillors? Okay. So the recommendations for this report is for the committee to note the results of the SIPFA Resilience Index of 2023, and I believe we are happy to note those. Next item is number 6, which is the internal audit progress report, and that is Mr. Andrew Wood.
Thank you, Chair. This report is provided quarterly to the committee and outlines the performance of the internal audit service against the agreed audit plan and provides an update relating to outstanding audit recommendations. The information provided relates to the first quarter of 2023-24 and is up to date as at 30th of June 2023. The audit plan for 2023-24 comprises 19 audits, including additional IT audits, and the team's plan is to complete 90% of the plan by 31st of March next year. The audit plan was developed taking into account the strategic risks of the council, discussions with senior management, an IT audit needs assessment, and agreement by this committee on 23rd of March 2023. For information, internal audit is a shared service between Lichfield District Council and Tamworth Borough Council, and this enables us to achieve savings in delivery and sharing of best practice. Additional resources drawn down by using BDO to deliver additional general auditor work, and eTech Business Services that deliver our specialist IT audits. The Internal Audit Service is required to comply with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. To provide assurance over the section's compliance with these standards, the service was externally quality assessed against those standards, and the results of it were reported to this committee on 23rd of March 2023. The service was found to generally conform with the standards, and an agreed action plan has been developed. I have outlined within my report the profile of work for 2023-24, but would like to highlight that this is an indicative timetable only. This work does move between quarters depending upon resource changes during the year and other factors, including taking into account management requests for the scheduling of reviews. I would also like to highlight that as at the 30th of June 2023, we have completed 11% of the audit plan against the profiled expectation of 21%. This was due to exceptional circumstances in relation to a family bereavement. I wish to reassure the committee that we've drawn down an additional 18 audit days from BDO, and we also have flexibility to draw down further work and resource if required. Ongoing, I will keep the committee updated with progress against the audit plan. However, I do envisage that a small number of audits scheduled for Q2 will be moved to later in the financial year. Detailed work of the service is contained in Appendix 1 of my report. I also report on the current outstanding audit recommendations, and in terms of those recommendations, we currently have 189 outstanding, and a summary is provided both within my report and also Appendix 1. Excuse me. This analysis highlights the split between high, medium and low priority recommendations. Additionally, I provided further detail with respect to the high priority recommendations. Again, I report quarterly to this committee on progress of implementation and anticipate further meetings with senior management to address these issues. I'm more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions from members or comments from members? Yeah, Councillor Whitehouse.
Yes, Andrew, I was looking at the paperwork to try and see what the 13 high risk items were. I couldn't see those.
But they're at the end of the report, Councillor, in relation to Appendix 1 of the quarterly progress report. The last 2 pages include those recommendations. Yeah, page 44 of the pack.
Councillor House, did you have anything else to add to that?
So I was just trying to find, I just wondered if you could summarise them for me. I just can't quite see them. The 13, just a passing comment on what they offer is.
The first high priority is in relation to e-payments, and there is an ongoing review in relation to payment card industry standards, which is currently being worked through at the moment. And we have carried out a follow-up review during Q1, and that we're currently liaising with management in relation to those recommendations and to progress that through to completion. Other areas in relation to the high priority recommendations around property leases and charges, and again, we do review the implementation of those recommendations and confirm that those reviews have been undertaken, and we are expecting that implementation has been completed. For information for the committee, any high priority recommendations that are made, we have to actually, as internal audit, see evidence that those have been completed. So therefore, that is in hand currently. We've also got in the review IT system security, which again is scheduled for review in 2023-24. And there was a number of areas around in relation to GDPR as well, which we're currently addressing. I have actually carried out the follow-up review of GDPR, and that is in a significant better place due to Laura's significant work over the past months. And again, I've completed the field work in those areas, and I just need to actually compile the final report. But again, I think we'll be moving from a limited assurance review up to substantial assurance, which is a significant progress in the last 6 months. Again, we'll be carrying out a review of IT disaster recovery and following up on that during the year. Again, there's a number of recommendations there that actually weren't actually due when I first compiled the report, and those are in relation to climate change. And again, that's an ongoing review that we'll be picking up on. And again, there was safeguarding as well, which again, we need to actually see the evidence around the risk assessments on safeguarding to actually sign that recommendation off. But that's in summary of the high priority recommendations that we've got.
Thank you for your comprehensive.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, so the recommendations for this report are to note the internal audit's annual report, including results from the quarter to the 30th of June 2023. Are we happy to do so? Well, those are noted. Next, we come to item 7, which is the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. Again, that is Mr. Andrew Wood. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Each year, I bring to this committee my annual report detailing our compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. As I previously stated, during 2022-23, we undertook an external quality assessment of our compliance with those standards. And again, as I previously reported, that was reported to this committee on the 23rd of March 2023. For information, this assessment is undertaken every 5 years and is fed into this year's annual report, which is Appendix 1, and the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme for 2023-24 as Appendix 2. The report also includes an agreed external quality assessment action plan for actions to be completed during the financial year 2023-24 as Appendix 3. As part of my reporting to this committee, it was agreed on the 23rd of March that I will bring a report to this committee on a quarterly basis to provide assurance over those actions being completed. I can reiterate that the service generally conforms with the public sector internal audit standards, and again, this is highlighted in Appendix 1 of my report. I would also like to highlight that due to actions currently being outstanding on the external quality assessment action plan, there are still a small number of standards that are showing as advisory, i.e. in a yellow triangle, rather than full compliance, which is a green tick. It should be noted that my conformance with the standards is undertaken as at the 1st of April each year. Therefore, during the upcoming financial year, those standards highlighted by yellow advisory triangles will be updated for compliance with implementation of recommendations achieved. As Appendix 2, I've included the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme for 2023-24, and this provides an overview of the work to be undertaken and the ongoing monitoring arrangements put into place with timescales, officer responsibilities and reporting lines. Appendix 3 outlines the external quality assessment action plan agreed by internal audit and senior management at both Lichfield District and Tamworth Borough Council. The results of the external quality assessment highlighted 12 recommendations, of which 7 were of the review category and 5 were of the consider category. As highlighted earlier, we agreed all those recommendations. To date, as at the 30th of June 2023, we have completed 3 out of the 7 review recommendations and 3 out of the 5 consider recommendations. I've highlighted the actions taken and the timescales for implementation of the remaining recommendations. A further 6 recommendations were made that the assessor felt would enhance the service moving forward. Again, we agreed all those recommendations. Currently, we have completed 2 out of the 6 recommendations. Again, actions are highlighted with timescales. Moving forward, I'll bring the external quality assessment action plan to you within my quarterly progress report to provide an overview of completion of those actions and also to provide assurance around those actions being completed. I'm more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions, comments regarding this report? Okay, in that case, our recommendations are that the committee notes internal audits compliance with the PSIAS Appendix 1, the QAIP Appendix 2, and external quality assessment action plan in Appendix 3. Are we happy to consider those noted? We'll move on to item 8, the risk management update. And again, I think that's you, Andrew. You had a glass of water just to...
Thank you, Chair. Each quarter, I bring a report to this committee for you to note the council's risk management update and receive assurance on actions being undertaken by the council to mitigate the strategic risks identified. For your information, I've included the council's risk management policy as Appendix 1, and this provides the council's approach to risk management. The policy is reviewed every 2 years and will be reviewed again in November 2023. Once agreed by a leadership team, this will be brought to you for information. As outlined in my report, the council operates a 3-line of defence model in terms of risk management, and this provides a structured and agreed format for the management of both strategic and operational risks within the council. The first line of defence are those functions that own and manage risks and is formed by managers and staff who are responsible for identifying and managing risks as part of their accountability for achieving objectives. The second line of defence are those functions that oversee or who specialise in compliance of the management of risk. And the third line of defence are those functions that provide independent assurance and is undertaken by internal audit, external audits, and also the Ombudsman. I'd like to highlight that internal audit's role in risk management is to ensure that the first 2 lines of defence are operating effectively and advise how they can improve. I would also stress that internal audit do not own the risks highlighted in the first line. These are managed by senior executive and also line management of the council. Appendix 2 of my report highlights the current council strategic risk register and links directly into the 3 lines of defence model, with the assurances obtained and given by management, compliance reviews, and internal audit's own assurance and audits. Appendix 2 also includes those areas on the horizon, which, whilst they're not full strategic risks, are considered areas to keep a watching brief. I've also been tasked with looking at leisure services insourcing risk and will report accordingly to the leadership team once this work has been completed. And this will be updated within the strategic risk register following approval by the leadership team. I'm more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions, comments from members? Oh, I'm just going to welcome Councillor Robertson, who's walked in.
Yeah, apologies about that, Chair. The M1 was not my friend today. There's been some Anglo-Saxon language in my car. We're off air. I will happily share that with anybody.
Thank you, Councillor. We were made aware that you would be running late due to traffic. So again, any questions, comments regarding this report? Well, I'll start off with a question for Andrew. On SR7, the original score was 4, our target score was 4, yet we have a current score of 8. Can you tell us why that's occurred and how we can bring that back to our target score, please?
Effectively, strategic risk 7 in relation to cybersecurity is an element that changes over time with all strategic risks. Generally, what you find is that, and certainly that risk in particular, because of the current political circumstances that is currently facing the council, but also wider nationally, what we find is that we do get notified from the Cybersecurity Centre, National Cybersecurity Centre, in relation to potential attacks against either central government or local government or other areas within operating within the UK. This has become more prevalent, I would suggest, with more national players, shall we say, within that environment in relation to obviously the current conflict in Ukraine, for example. And again, what I would suggest is that the current score does move over time as those attacks are identified and then they're mitigated, and then the score actually reduces over time. From our perspective in relation to reducing that score, it's maintaining the communication with leadership team in relation to that, and also ICT, making sure that we have processing in relation to, for example, multi-factor authentication, ensuring that our systems are secure and that all firewalls are effectively patched on time and up to date to maintain that we have got a secure environment in relation to that. So again, as that will develop over time, we have got the mitigating actions in place in relation to that. The reason why the current score is higher is to keep that in front of both leadership team and also wider ICT management as well, to ensure that it is continually managed and that we're not open to any cyber attacks or loss of data or any errors in relation to that.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions or comments? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on that question, it sounded like the answer was we're recognising a much higher external risk, but that our response is to keep doing what we're doing only a little bit more, or are we implementing additional mitigations to mitigate that specific risk? And I realise that the external risk is pretty nebulous and at high level.
I think from the council's perspective, it's maintaining that approach that we don't open ourselves out as an authority in relation to security and cybersecurity in relation to that. I think the general issue is that over time the types of attacks change. And as part of those changes, then we have to mitigate those changes. And that's the reason why we need to keep up to date with the National Cybersecurity Centre in relation to their recommendations, and also our own internal ICT systems to make sure that they are continually being, like I say, just basically patched, the firewalls are secure, and we've got those elements in place. I think it's a very difficult risk to score generally because of those changes that happen over time. And I think the reason why it is up at 8 a number of months ago, I would suggest that it was actually up at 12 rather than 8, and because of the mitigations that we put in place, we've lowered that current score down, and that was partly due to implementing multi-factor authentication, making sure that the firewalls are patched, and making sure that there is full responsibility in relation to ICT and there is a management trail in that. So I hope that answers the question towards that.
Oh yes,
So can I just add to that as well? Just there's a couple of things probably it's worth mentioning. So the council brought in a specialist support to the ICT team, company called Razor Blue, to provide additional skills and capacity to help out not only with the day-to-day work, but any system enhancements that we make. They are one of they've got more expertise in this area, so it provides added capacity and expertise in this area. I'd also say that as a strategy approach, we're looking to move all of our systems to cloud-based systems. So rather than us hosting here on site with servers and having the risks of having to upgrade servers, etc., they're done by specialist companies that do the backup, do testing, the system security, all that sort of thing. So it's removing a lot of the risk from the council and putting it with people at better place to manage that risk. And it'd be fair to say as well, we've probably got a more comprehensive user training program. I think my perspective with this is you can have brilliant systems, you can have up-to-date systems, you can have training for weeks, but often in an individual or a group of individuals that not through negligence or want, you have a moment where you switch off and you press the link and you've gone into a macro or something that's like it. So the aim is to provide users with more information around what to look out for, what the consequences of that are, and that's probably a more comprehensive program than we've had previously. I don't think we will ever get in a situation where you will move the risk in this area, but I would say that we're doing more of what we can do to mitigate that risk.
Thank you, Anthony. Anything else you want to add or any supplementary questions, Councillor Taylor?
I think.
Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Chair. If I can go back a couple of strategic risks, back all those, the top list, I'll one. I'm aware this document was written in April 23, and we're kind of 3 months removed from that because something may or may not have happened in May. Just in terms of that, I'm aware that the financial situation is different now than it was then. But I think we can all recognise that there is a particular time bomb ticking away in the economy at the minute, particularly around interest rates and mortgages. I'm aware that increased interest rates will likely better our financial position because we're currently a net investor, not a net borrower. My concern is the very real risk of significant numbers of residents going into mortgage delinquency and potentially defaults because of those rising interest rates. We know they're going to come. We know that there's a very real potential for that to impact on our council tax revenue, potentially the collection fund and things along those lines. Is that something that we're already picking up on the horizon scanning? I'm aware that I'm a couple of months ahead, but it's a very real thing. I can't remember off the top of my head that there's a large number of more fixed rates that are up in the next 3 months.
I'm not aware at the moment in the what we're 4 months into the financial year that collection rates are significantly deteriorated. And now that's not to say they won't do, but it may be a reflection of the demographics of the area where maybe there's more affluence. What I would say, so there's a couple of things I would say on that is that we do build quite prudent estimates around bad debt provisions into the collection fund. We were able to increase the bad debt provisions in the previous financial year to take account of potentially reduced collection rates. And what we also did for this financial year and the next financial year is to build £50,000 budget in each year for specifically to deal with cost of living pressures. And I don't know whether that will be enough. We'll have to see. It hasn't been accessed as far as I'm aware at the moment, but that is there to do hardship or disruption of housing or the like housing, anything like that. And we'd have to keep that under review, to be honest. I'm not saying that 50,000 is that's it. We need to look at the overall financial position. That you are right, interest rates do benefit us at the moment in the fact that we're a net investor.
Thank you for that. As ever, I always appreciate the reassurance about section 151%. I think the thing I'd say on that is I think if we are continuing to look at this and in those 3 lines of assurance, we can make sure that kind of collection rate and how the performance of the collection fund is kept under review, because it's one of those things that might come through and spot it early. It's going to be very, very beneficial.
So just to reassure you on that, Councillor Robertson, then when we do the money matters reports at 368, council tax collection and arrears and business rate collection is a standard item that's within there. So if there is a deterioration, we'll spot it pretty early, and I'm pretty confident the revenues and benefits manager will be on top of it now, let alone when we get to the points that are about it.
Anything else, Councillor Officer?
That's fine, thank you, Chair.
Any of the questions, comments? So the recommendations for this item is that the members note the risk management update and receive assurance on on actions taking place to manage the council's most significant risks. Are we happy that we've done that? Yes. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to cycle back to item number 3 because, as previously mentioned, there was only 2 members of the previous Audit and Member Standards Committee here. That's myself and Councillor Robertson. Now Councillor Robertson is present and hopefully willing to second those minutes. I'm going to do that now. So, do I have a seconder for those minutes? And I propose them.
Really mischievous part of my brain that's ticking over at the minute, but no, of course, happy to second those, Chair.
And we're happy to accept those minutes as well. Very good. I'll take those minutes then. Back to business as usual. We'll now move on to item number 9. Compliments, complaints, MP and FOIs, inquiries report 2022 to 2023. And that's is it?
Evening all. I'm really pleased to be bringing this report to you tonight. It summarises the feedback that the council received over the past year and explains what we've done with that feedback and how we've used that feedback to shape and better our services. Complaints are a really important part of that. They give us an insight into what might be going wrong in the council, what processes need to be looked at, and what training we might need to give our staff and teams to make sure that we address issues. And the first page of the appendix, which is a new style report that we're aiming to publish very publicly. So previously, this type of report wasn't made public, wasn't promoted, wasn't used as a tool to give confidence to customers that we take the feedback seriously, and that's something we want to address within this. Explains in a very open and frank way how we have dealt with feedback, how we put measures in place to tackle issues that may exist within the council, and how we're working to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. It also has some really nice highlights in there. It talks about the different compliments we've received and the difference that teams across the council are making to people's lives through the way in which they deliver services. And it also gives a good summary of MP inquiries and freedom of information requests, as well as ombudsman inquiries, which are where complaints escalate to the ombudsman because we haven't been able to deal with them to the satisfaction of the customers within the council. MP inquiries are an area that we need to work on, and we need to be looking at MP inquiries as another form of complaint, because oftentimes MP inquiries are where customers reach out to an MP because they want a stronger or louder voice to support them, and we need to make sure we're using those in the same way moving forward as we do complaints to shape and improve our services. I'd be really interested in feedback from the committee on the style of the report and whether you think that's accessible to customers. We're keen to publish it online, both as a download but also accessible web pages so customers can see it and read it. And I'd also be interested in your feedback on how we've actually written and the language used within the report and whether you feel it's accessible. There are some nice highlights in the report, which I'm sure you've read, in terms of the fact that we've actually had a drop in the number of stage 1 complaints investigated. So this is in line with targets set through being a better council programme. And we've also had a large number of compliments with the change in the teams that are actually being complimented. So I think previous reports the planning service was an area that didn't receive many compliments. And you'll see in this report that actually the planning services have increased the number of compliments it's received. So clearly that learning that we've been putting in place is starting to have an effect and starting to provide outcomes for customers. Moving forward, the council is keen, and again I'd be interested in the views of the committee to take this report to cabinet, so it really does form a central plan for how we measure the performance of the council moving forward, and for it to form part of that wider performance management regime. So this would be the last time that this would come to this committee, but I'd love to have your feedback to make sure we're taking it forward in a way that reflects the needs and wants of this committee and ensures that we're delivering it in a sound and positive way moving forward. So open to some questions and feedback, and I'd love your input.
Thank you, Lizzie. And as Lizzie has mentioned, this will be the last time it comes back to this committee. So please, if you do have any comments or feedback questions for Lizzie, please go ahead and make it known. Councillor Robertson.
One or two which I've kind of done in order of the report, so they may not be the most thematically linked in terms of. Chair, are you happy for us to go back forward, or do you want to go through it at a time, or are you comfortable if we just?
I'm happy. No one else is indicating this. I'm happy.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. So the first one, page 97 of my pack on that first page, and the stage one upheld, partially upheld, and stage one not upheld, and that's 22 and 26, which is 48. What happened to the other 9?
So they're still in progress.
Brilliant. Sorry, I figured that would be it, but
So what we do is we cut up at the end of the year and there'll still be a number that's still in progress.
so yeah, I'm hoping that we obviously gone through. Recommendation 2.3 is delegating any amendments to this to the legal council in consultation with the assistant director of customer relations and business services. I'd be more comfortable if we tagged onto there and the chair of the audit and member standards committee. I think that would be very appropriate. Everybody's nodding, so things thrown at me, which is usually good. Coming on to the report, bottom of page 101, which is the front page of the annual review there, and slow communication with planning enforcement, so place resource issues with departure of officers and recruiters under away. And we also put in a market supplement. And I know the council has done that. I think this is something we could reflect in here, saying we recognise that recruitment was an issue, so we've found ways of driving that recruitment even faster.
I can certainly reflect that, yeah, no problem.
We've spent the money, let's tell
No,
people spend the money on it. Next page, key facts about complaints. This one, in terms of whether it's successful or not, I believe, I'm not a typologist, I believe that's Times New Roman.
No, Calibri.
Calibri. And the one thing I noticed is it's got that, there is a word for this, I can remember what it is. The A's have got the little kind of line as a hat on them.
Oh, right, yeah.
And in a previous slide, I did a little bit about this. I think that's one of the major drivers that makes it difficult for people with dyslexia to access.
Oh, okay, so a change of font.
Yeah, potentially, I think the dyslexia society has got stuff online in terms of what you can use. The ones without that little hat are generally preferred. The most obvious one is Comic Sans. Please, from the bottom and please, do not put this in Comic Sans. So on to the next page, MPs inquiries. It looks as if the MPs inquiries are being dealt with faster than regular complaints, which is a concern. Is there any reason why that? Is there an explanation for why that evidence is there? Because I'm sure none of us would expect that to be the case.
I would have to say that the MP inquiries is something that we need to get under the middle. We need to see MP inquiries. We need to treat it as like an MP inquiry with the same priority. But they certainly shouldn't be prioritised over one another. They're equally as important. But what we do need to make sure is we're extracting the learning from the MP inquiries and making sure we're using that in a really transparent way to improve our services. So I think next time we do this report, I'll certainly be able to give more information with regards to that and have more data. With the way in which we capture data on the current system, we monitor for MP inquiries and it is for complaints, and we need to make sure it's as robust. So we can answer that type of query moving forward.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. It's just, I'm just going to compare to the minutes and looking at what I'm seeing here. I think the number of queries or complaints which are not investigated within target timescales is 2.5 times higher for non-MP than MPs. That's a problem. So I think that's something that we really need to like buy under and important to access. And then I think my last one on this, it is my last one on this, and the very back page on key facts about freedom of information requests. 90% on time sounds great, but if we've got 248 coming in, 10% of those not being on time is 24.8. I'm going to round down for some easy maths to say that's 2 a month. And twice a month, us not following our obligations under the statute in terms of following freedom of information requests again is not great. I'm aware there are sometimes issues with FOI requests. And I know very few organisations get to 100%, but 2 a month is a bit of a concern for me. So I don't know if there's something there that is there something that you need us doing as a committee, feeding into cabinet and saying to cabinet that there's additional support needs somewhere in the council? Or is there anything that you need from us in order to make that number go up?
So I think the reassurance to get that question sit into my mind. So do you want to build this one? Yes. So quite recently, I've introduced a new dashboard and I've moved to IT. I should probably clarify that I sat in governance until quite recently, and I've moved to monitor systems and to get in touch with data and sit within that full service. And as part of that, we've created a dashboard on our Pentana system, so that we have 10 working days for every single staff member to complete an FOI. That's our internal deadline now. If they don't do that, the dashboard will flag with the tier 4 manager, who have their entire dashboard of all their FOIs and what their stats are. And if that isn't done, I will then report into leadership team quarterly, and we will publicise who is and who isn't completing those 10-day internal timeframes. That allows us 10 days of leeway if there's any additional information connected that they need to obtain.
So already on it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Councillor Whitehouse.
In answer to your question, I think it was refreshing to see the style of this report. A lot of the other reports, as good as they are very heavy to read and go through, whereas this is a lot more user friendly. So I would certainly say and commend you for putting it together in this format.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehouse. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just to echo Councillor Whitehouse's comments, I found it incredibly easy to use. I know Councillor Robertson's comment on the font, but I felt in general it felt quite accessible. It's dense text. It probably has to be dense text, but it felt quite accessible. Small tweaks like the font, and I think you'll find Atkinson hyperlegible is the recommended one from. Other than that, I just had a question on freedom of information requests, and we have a target to reduce freedom of information requests, and that feels counterintuitive to me, because if we want to be an open organisation, surely we should welcome freedom of information requests, and the only way we could avoid that is by putting everything out there in the first place.
Absolutely. We're not going to reduce by blocking people from accessing that service. What we are doing is working on a completely new way of engaging with residents. So we're looking at moving our data from one site to another. So the open source data is not accessible. We're looking at completely refurbing part of the website to do the FOIs so that everything is hyperlinked in a more accessible way. So my new team in information management, they'll be looking at how we filter those requests and how we better understand where they're looking for that information. So anything that goes to services that you'll see with an FOI is something that we then understand that we need to publish down the line. And we'll have a look at FAQs and stuff that's being frequently requested, like business rates, and make sure that's front-end consented. And if we know there's any sort of peaks and troughs through the year, we'll make sure that there's a front-end consented on the website. So it's not through reducing it, it's through increasing our transparency that will reduce those FOIs.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, feedback? Okay, I'll give mine now then. So again, just to echo Disney about the report being very straightforward, easy to read. I welcome Councillor Robertson's and Councillor Taylor's remarks regarding the font, hyperlegible, I think it is. Yeah. Excellent. And yeah, so if everyone's happy for us to proceed with the recommendations, which has been amended slightly. 2.2 to the committee's comment on and approve the publication of the customer feedback annual review 22-23, subject to any feedback by the committee, which would give plenty of feedback. Or 2.3 committee to delegate any amends to the leader of the council in consultation with the Assistant Director of Customer, Resident and Business Services and the Chair of the Audit and Member Standards Committee. And 2.4, committee to note that future customer feedback annual reviews will also be considered by the Cabinet. Are we all happy to take those recommendations? Aye. That's carried.
Thank you.
Thought you were getting off easy when I wanted.
Okay, item 10, the RIPA reports, policy monitoring, and that is. Yeah.
For those of you who are astute, you'll realise that I am not the FRO about the policy. That is Mark Cooper, our monitoring officer. He is on annual leave this week, so he can't bring his forward, so I brought it to you. So every year we have to bring the policy to you for review and approval. As an audit requirement. We're doing a little early this year, maybe it will be later on in the year, but there are talks through different services and wanting to look at potentially using RIPA and engaging RIPA. So it's important that we bring it to you now as a new committee so that you've seen this and you have an opportunity to put any comments or any feedback for the policy. And if you're happy with it, approve it. So if we do through the year, you've already seen this and approved it ahead of that needs. We have undertaken training quite recently. I have passed this over as the acting coordinator onto the government team. There'll be additional training for social media use for RIPA, because that's going to be one of the primary uses if this is used going forward. So it's very simplistic in terms of policy. So any questions?
Thank you, Laura. Any questions, comments, feedback regarding this item? Just one from me then, Laura. In regards to using social media for surveillance, a lot of things online are quite freely available. So how does that come into in relation to that surveillance?
One-off review of social media is already open, is absolutely fine. If you start doing every single day, then it becomes straight out surveillance, and you need to make sure we're doing the right authorization for doing that.
Okay, so basically visiting someone's account multiple times would be considered. Thank you. Councillor Robertson, I knew I'd get the juices going.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, two comments. One, thank you for using track changes. Long may this continue. Just around COVID human intelligence sources, I very much welcome the very clear, emboldened, capital letters underlined comment in there, which is an assurance I was looking for, and rather preempting on that. Just looking there, it doesn't absolutely say in there that this will automatically be reported to us. Now I know that it will come through in the reports anyway, but I think in terms of practice and policy, I think it would strengthen the policy to put in there that any time a COVID human intelligence source is used, that it will form part of the reports, because I think it reinforces the seriousness of that type of intervention. So although I don't think it'll make any difference in policy, I think as officers working through this and looking into this report, having that there as a reminder, as kind of Aidan was to officers, that this is a very serious step, which we may be forced to take, but we very much hope not to. I think that will just help and hopefully reduce the amount of emails that come into yourself, Mark, saying how we do it.
I'm more than happy with that.
Okay, as no one else has indicated to speak, the recommendations are that the Audit and Member Standards Committee notes the RIPA monitoring report for the 22-23 financial year, that the Audit and Member Standards Committee approves the update corporate policy and procedure for RIPA as set out in Appendix 1. Are we happy to do so? Yeah, okay. Item 11 is the audit plan, and that's by our external auditors. After, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual audit plan for 22-23. So the period ending 31st of March 23. So in the audit plan, we've identified some significant risks. I'll go through them, but just to give an overview, these are audit risks that we put into all of our local government audits. So there's nothing specific in terms of a specific area of concern in respect to Lichfield. So the risks that there are, so ISO 240, there's always a risk of fraud and fraud in revenue and recognition of expenditure. We've rebutted that risk at the council because we don't believe there's an incentive to do so just because of the funding regime expenditure, which would actually then rise into a material mistake in the financial statement. Management override control, that's how management could use journals and estimates to manipulate the financial performance of the entity. We don't rebut this risk, but we do focus testing on journals and estimates just to make sure they are supported in line with expectation, etc. So we do a lot of work around journals and estimates. And then the two other big areas of focus are valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the pension fund net liability. And the reason why these are significant risks are they're the two probably the biggest numbers in the financial statements, and they are estimates. So it requires specialists to come in. For land and buildings, a valuer who comes in and does valuation of the land and buildings. For the pensions, it's based on actuarial functions and reports. So there is a lot of testing we do to make sure the assumptions that they're using are correct and in line with market market evidences that we do have. And because they're so big, the numbers, it can become materially misstated. If there's something that's slightly wrong, if there could be an error, which means that we need to amend the financial statements. So that's why they're the significant risk areas. In terms of our approach to materiality, so we don't report everything in our audit findings report. We set some tolerance levels. So our materiality is 829k, which is based on around 2% of the expenditure. This was based on the draft accounts, and we'll update this again based on the financial statements we get from audit. But when it comes to reporting, we will report anything which is over 41.5k as a reportable error. If there's aggregates which actually add up to 41.5k, again we will report that as well, just to be clear. But if it's less than that, we wouldn't report. In terms of our value for money arrangements, so we are behind where we would want to be. We would have wanted to actually have, given annual report for 21-22. But what we've decided to do is to do the 21 and 22 report and the 22-23 report as a combined report, given where we are at the time, and we can just give a combined commentary around both years in terms of value for money arrangements, and therefore get back on track in terms of our delivery time. So, and what we're hoping to do is by the end of this calendar year, be able to sign off the audit opinions and pass on to the auditor who's coming in. So at that point, I am happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Avatar. Any questions, comments, feedback?
I'm completely going to have some.
Councillor Robertson, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, in relation to the £41,000 limit of reportable, I'm assuming that's 0.1% of revenue.
I'm not sure. We calculate materiality at 2%, and then we calculate that at 5% of materiality that we set. So it's 5% of that figure. So
that's 0.1%. That's the same maths I did. Thank you for that. So yeah, thank you for that clarification. And the major point I want to make is in terms of the rolling like the previous year's audit into this year's audit and having an overall. That means that effectively we're going to be without a value for money statement for last year until the end of this year. That's a concern for me. And it does mean that whilst I have no reason, I have no evidence to tell me that this is going to be a problem, and that actually if you were to complete that work ahead of time that it would come out that there was a value for money problem, or if there were any significant reports or certainly any material reports. that's not there, but I also don't have the evidence, and it doesn't look like we're going to have the evidence until the end of this financial year. That's amazing.
So on that, so as an auditor, my responsibility, if there was a material problem or significant problem in terms of value for money arrangements, I have to report it as soon as I'm made aware of it. So it will come to the next committee. From the work that, I mean, the work is actually being undertaken right now as we speak. There is no material risks that are coming through. So there is no significant weaknesses. So I can give you assurances around that. And the plan is to hopefully actually get this work completed for both years by September time. So it would actually come before then, when the proposal in November. But I didn't want to commit to that early just in case there are delays. But from work undertaken to date, there is no significant weakness in arrangements that we have uncovered in terms of the value for money work.
Anything else, Councillor Robertson? Yes, in relation to that, I mean, I completely understand. Obviously, we've been kept abreast of things slipping, and we're aware of where the local government audit landscape. Is that the word I'm looking for? And we're aware of the difficulties faced by internal audit in local government. But one thing it is, I am somewhat reassured by the fact that, you know, if you came across a problem, it was reported immediately, and I appreciate that. But it sounds like actually the whole council isn't going to get looked at until then, and I understand the reasons for that. It is a concern. It doesn't seem like there's a huge amount we can do that. But particularly around fees for this year, fees are nothing. Is that the fact that a lot of last year's audits slipped into this year, is that reflected in the fee that sits here?
So with the audit fee, we base it on an individual year, and because of some of the issues that we faced in the slippage, we haven't added on additional overrun fees for 21-22. So because we know a lot of that's our fault in terms of delivery, so we're not charging the council for that in terms of increasing the audit fee. So I can reassure you that it's not a continuation coming into this year. The audit fee here is based on auditing the audit for this 22-23 year only.
And then there's been no reduction in those fees from last year to account for those changes.
No, so it's just every year we have to put the fee in, but as you can see, the actual fee has actually fallen slightly compared to the previous year, and the main driver from that was last year we were looking at the IT audit because there was a ledger change, but we're not doing that this year because we've got the assurances we need.
And sorry, Chair, I realise I'm going to kind of knock through you, but yeah, the final one from me is we are now looking at last year's kind of rolled into this year. In terms of making sure that this year happens, can you give us that? I know you can't give us 100% assurance, maybe in account, but I'm really hoping there's going to be something that you're going to be able to say that this work is not going to then continue to slip, this audit is vital. But I think we've been very fortunate at this district council for a long time. We've had really strong audit committees. We've had really strong auditory processes, and Ground Thought have been a huge part of that. I mean, I completely recognise your input as part of that. But we've had significant changes in this room. I know I've spoken to the chair about that in relation to what may be coming under the work programme. But I think we really need that external partner to be there at the moment. So I'm hoping there's some changes to be given.
So there's one big change I've made to the team, and that's putting Ellie, who used to work on the audit, back onto the audit this year. Given we know what happened last year, so we decided we had to go and refresh the team and actually appoint Ellie, who's worked on the audit for a number of years beforehand, and that gives me a bit more assurance that we will make up for lost time. And that was, the decision we had to make things work. We want to get basically to the end of the financial year, the calendar year, and be able to hand over to us, and that's the plan. And hoping that all goes to plan now.
Is that everything for you, Councillor Robertson? Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Arthur. I'm going to Councillor P. Taylor next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regards to the slippage on that value for money, how does that how does that put us in standing compared to other councils, other similar councils? Is this an issue other councils are facing, and therefore not a particular criticism of anything the council has done, or are we standing alone here?
So, to give you context, it's only about 15 to 20% of councils where they've actually issued probably the audit opinion and the value for money work, worked in the 21, 22. So you're in the majority, but the value for money work delivery is not a criticism of the council. It's not because they haven't allowed us to do it. It's just we've had capacity and resource constraints where we focus on other areas, which meant things have slipped over. So in an ideal world, I would have been able to sign off the financial statement by March or something, and the annual report would have came to that. But we've had some just slippages across the country and things have just got delayed. But now what we've also done now is I've actually engaged an external, not an external expert, not from my team, but from our value for money team that we do have, to actually carry out this work, so that there's no pressure on my team members, but we have got someone who's qualified to look at the value for money work, so therefore we can bring this report to you more quickly.
Any supplementary, Councillor?
I know it's mentioned.
Anyone else? Okay, just one thing from me. So how confident are you that there will be no more delays?
I'm confident, but so there is always uncertainty around it. But I know for 22-23 we will pull it back. We've got one issue around on 21-22 at the moment, which is around a triennial evaluation and impact, and myself and Anthony have been in dialogue and to work out a way forward in that. But this is an issue which has impacted all open audits. It's about having to use the best data out of the time after the audit and seeing what impact that would have on the pension liability. And given what we've already discussed this earlier in the meeting today, there's been a big swing in terms of asset valuation of the liability, and therefore we have to say, given the new data in place, will that materially impact the financial statements, and then we have to go through a few procedures around that. So it's all sometimes feels a lot of work to get the assurance, but we just have to comply with the accounting standards, etc. And we'll work with management to get to a point where we can resolve this as soon as possible.
Thank you, Avatar. As there's no one else indicating, there's no formal recommendations for this item. It's just really to listen and take note of that report. So what we'll do, we'll move on to item 11. Sorry, item 12, in fact, which is informing the audit risk assessment district council against the external auditors. Thank you, Avatar.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a document we bring annually to audit committees, and what the purpose is to look at responses in respect to auditing, we call them the ISAs. So we have to ask management a series of questions about general inquiries, board laws and regulations, related parties, going concern and accounting estimates, and then management put their responses into this document, and we bring it to audit committee just to say this is what the management are saying around these responses. And then we also look at these responses and say, is there anything in here that we think provides an additional risk for the audit? Having reviewed the comments that management provided, I don't believe there's anything that I need to draw attention to which would create another risk in our audit delivery. So I'm happy to take any questions, but if there's any specific detail, it's probably going to be with Anthony and management to look at them to give us their responses.
Thank you, Avatar. Any questions, comments regarding item 12? No? Okay. So we'll move on to item 13, which is the work programme. Will?
Yeah, so just to inform the committee, as I know there's a lot of new members, the work programme is included at the end of each meeting, and it just outlines what items are going to be brought to each committee in the upcoming municipal year. We try to balance this as best we can every year to ensure a good workload scrutiny balance so that members aren't overwhelmed with the amount of reports they have to look at. Sometimes there are deadlines on certain reports. So there are reports that can't be moved for one reason or another to a separate meeting, so they have to come when they come. But yeah, this is purely for note and any feedback. If members are happy to note the work programme.
Councillor Robertson. Thank you, Chair. Let's take the unusual step of thanking the Chair, something. And just in relation to one of the items that will appear on the next agenda, the skills review and discussion of the appointment of an independent member. I know that's something we've had some discussions about, and I mean, I've been clear about certainly my initial position on that. So I'd like to thank you for making sure that's brought forward in as timely manner as possible. Thanks, Councillor Robson, and yeah, happy to accommodate that to be brought forward to the September meeting. Anthony?
Sorry, Chair, I was just gonna, there's a number of items on the agenda for the September meeting which relate to the same to account. I suppose I just want to get Aptar's view as to whether that will take place or whether we need to delay those to a later date in the agenda. I think we probably have to delay in terms of the annual, the auditing report, etc., because our field work only kicks off in end of August time, so we wouldn't have finished the audit by then. But we should be able to, I think, the November committee bring the items there.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions about the work programme? Okay. Oh, sorry, Andy.
Sorry, it was just in relation to Councillor Robertson's comments in relation to the skills review and discussion on the independent member. If I encourage all those councillors who haven't completed their skills audit, including me, not naming names. If those could be passed through to me as soon as possible, then I could pull that together, but ready for the meeting. I sent it
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, just to reiterate, please, if you haven't done so already, you can send those over to Andrew. It's important because then we can identify skill gaps, and then that will aid us in appointing an independent member of the committee as well. So with every item now finished, I close the meeting at 7:22. Thank you very much.